My name is Elena Morgan, and I have perfectly mastered the art of disappearing right into plain sight. Not the disappearing trick that illusionists show. I'm talking about the way people's eyes slide right past you when they've decided you're not worth their attention. At 32, I've infiltrated terrorist cells, frozen the assets of international crime syndicates, and received secret commendations that are kept in a safe rather than hanging in frames on my wall. But when I walk into my family's waterfront mansion in Greenwich, I might as well be wearing an invisibility cloak. Do you know that feeling when your own family seems to be looking right through you? When all your accomplishments just evaporate into thin air because they don't meet someone else's expectations? Poor Helen, they whisper, the daughter who was content to shuffle papers at some obscure government agency instead of striving for the Morgan family legacy of wealth and status. Irony burns every time my father launches into another lecture on wasted potential at dinner, while my secure phone vibrates silently with updates on a money laundering case involving names he would have recognized from the Wall Street Journal. Tonight, trudging through rush hour traffic toward my father's 65th birthday celebration, I rehearse vague answers about my administrative position, unaware that in about 4 hours, the carefully constructed wall between my two lives will crumble in a most spectacular way. All because of one enthusiastic restaurant intern who will remember the federal agent running the operation from their back room, rather than the disappointing daughter my family thinks they'll meet over an overrated steak and condescending conversation. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Greenwich, Connecticut meant living under the constant pressure of having to achieve. Our spacious colonial family home served as the perfect backdrop for my parents to show off their 3 children to equally successful friends and coworkers. Imagine perfectly mowed lawns, exquisite architecture, and every interior detail screams success and status. That's the kind of environment we grew up in, like showpieces in a museum of family achievement. My sister Vanessa, who is 3 years older than me, she is now 35, embodied everything the Morgan family valued. With a Harvard medical degree and a position as a cardiothoracic surgeon at one of Boston's most prestigious hospitals, she was the golden child. Her marriage to Michael, a hedge fund manager from an even wealthier family, only cemented her status. Vanessa was always the one everyone looked at with admiration at family gatherings, the one whose stories of lives saved made guests gasp with delight and parents glow with pride. Vanessa had an 8-hour open-heart surgery yesterday, Mom proudly announced to her friends at brunch. Or, Michael and Vanessa just bought a house in the Back Bay. You should see the view of the Charles River from their living room. My younger brother Noah, now 30, was no less impressive in our parents' eyes. Graduating from Stanford with a double degree in computer science and business, he launched 3 successful tech startups before his 28th birthday, becoming the youngest millionaire in the family and a regular hero in business magazines as one of the best entrepreneurs under 35. Noah's company just raised a new round of funding of $15 million, Dad boasts over dinner with business associates. Or, the New York Times interviewed Noah about the future of artificial intelligence in finance. Did you read it? And then there's me. From an early age, I was different. I was drawn to solving puzzles and reading detective novels, while my brother and sister followed more traditional paths to success. I remember as a kid, while Vanessa was taking extra chemistry lessons and Noah was building his first website, I'd spread out newspaper clippings of criminal cases on the living room floor, trying to find connections the police might have missed. Elena, honey, why don't you get busy with something a little more productive? Mom suggested softly, looking anxiously at my makeshift investigation board. I'd always been a headache for my family, a mystery they couldn't solve. Not that I was a failure. I did well in school, captained the debate team, even won a few awards at science fairs. But my interests never fit into the Morgans' carefully constructed narrative of success, which was measured solely by prestige, money, and social status. When I announced my intention to major in criminal justice at a state university instead of enrolling in an Ivy League business school, a family dinner was the first time I saw genuine disappointment in my parents' eyes. I still remember that night. We were sitting in our formal dining room, a room used only for important conversations. Mom ordered my favorite lasagna from an Italian restaurant downtown, clearly trying to soften the blow she knew I was about to deliver. "I've decided to go to the University of Connecticut to study criminal justice," I said, trying to make my voice sound confident. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Mom took a sip of wine that was slightly larger than usual. Vanessa, home for the weekend from medical school, wrinkled her nose as if in physical pain. "Criminal justice?" her father finally uttered, and the two words sounded like misplayed notes in a symphony. "At the State University?" "Yes," I replied, my resolve beginning to crack under the weight of their collective frustration. "But honey," Mom interjected, her voice soft but her words sharp, "you have the grades for Yale, or at least for Vassar. Do you really want to limit yourself?" "I want to study what interests me," I replied, "and their program is one of the best in the country." "One of the best in-state programs," my father pointed out, stressing the word in-state as if it were a swear word. "And what are you going to do with that degree?" Noah, who was a senior in high school at the time, but had already been accepted to Stanford, asked, "Become a cop?" "There are a lot of options," I said, feeling myself start to get defensive. "FBI, law enforcement analytics, working in the prosecutor's office." "Government work," Dad sighed. Gerald Morgan, a former CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the country, couldn't imagine anything worse than working for the government. All those years in private schools, all those opportunities, for what? I stared at my plate, feeling my cheeks burning. In that moment, I realized a fundamental truth about my family. For them, success had a very specific definition, and what I wanted to do didn't fit into it. "I think it's a worthy career," I said quietly. "Of course it's worthy," Mom quickly agreed, casting a warning glance at Dad. Diane Morgan, a former state senator, had always been the family politician, skillfully smoothing over sharp edges. "It's just, we've always represented something more to you, Elena. You've always been so smart." Bigger was code for more prestigious, more lucrative, more impressive at dinner parties. You know what's funny about families like mine? They're so concerned with appearances that they completely miss the point. For my parents, a career had to be something that sounds impressive when they talk about it to their friends. What gives them the right to smile proudly at charity galas when someone asks, "What does your youngest do?" I lay awake that night, angry and doubting myself at the same time. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really am wasting my potential. Maybe I should take a more traditional path, law school, then a job at a prestigious firm where I'd earn a seven-figure salary defending corporations from the consequences of their actions. But deep down inside, I knew I couldn't. I had always been drawn to the puzzle of crime, the psychology behind it, and the satisfaction of getting justice. I wanted to do work that meant something, even if it didn't impress at cocktail parties. And so I became the Morgan family's lousy sheep, the one that people talk about in hushed tones. "Elena? Oh, she works for some government agency. Something administrative, I suppose. Such a shame, she had such potential. If only they knew. You know what's funny about life? How often our biggest disappointments turn out to be hidden blessings. While my brother and sister lived under the microscope of parental expectations, I was given the strange freedom of invisibility. When no one really pays much attention to what you're doing, you can do anything. And that's how I ended up in one of the federal government's most elite units, leading operations that sometimes made the national news, though my name was never mentioned. Operations that saved lives, prevented attacks, and recovered millions for victims of financial crime. But today, I push all those thoughts aside as my sedan approaches Bellevue, the exclusive restaurant in Greenwich, where my father decided to celebrate his 65th. I switch my phone to silent mode, but leave it on vibrate for emergency messages. I check my reflection in the rearview mirror. I look professional, but not too impressive in the navy blue suit I wear to work every day. Just the way it should be. Showtime, I whisper to myself as I prepare for another night where I'll play the role of the disappointing daughter they expect to see. What I don't know as I head towards this exquisite restaurant is that tonight will change everything, that my carefully constructed double life is about to come crashing down, and I will have to face the consequences. That finally, after all these years of invisibility, my family will actually see me. And I have no idea if I'm ready for that. If you've ever had to hide an important part of yourself from those who are supposed to know you best, you understand my dilemma. How do you reconcile who you have become with who others think you should have been? And is it even worth trying? You know how sometimes fate throws you an opportunity that completely changes the trajectory of your life. For me, that turning point was an offer to join a specialized federal division after 2 years in a standard field office. I still remember that day, an overcast Tuesday morning, when I was called into my supervisor's office. I was sure I was going to be reprimanded for being too aggressive in investigating a securities fraud case. Instead, a special branch representative was waiting for me with a folder marked Top Secret. "Agent Morgan, we've been observing your work," he said, reviewing my vitals. "You have a unique combination of skills that we need. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything you once considered your weaknesses suddenly turns into your most valuable qualities? My obsession with detail, my irrepressible curiosity, my ability to see patterns where others see only chaos, all the things that made my father roll his eyes and call me overly meticulous, suddenly became exactly what made me an asset. In my new unit, I found not only professional satisfaction, but also the perfect cover. Security protocols requiring agents to keep their specific roles secret became my shield against familial evaluations. "Sorry, that's classified," was a phrase that freed me from having to explain why my work mattered. In 5 years, I built a successful career investigating high-profile cases, directing operations that sometimes made national headlines. Remember the massive Ponzi scheme uncovered last year that returned more than $300 million to retirees? That was my operation. That potential attack on the financial infrastructure that was mentioned in passing on the evening news? My team worked without sleep for 72 hours to stop it. I received personal commendations from Director Harrington, a handshake from the secretary himself. My career had taken off, all in complete secrecy from those who seemed like they should have been happiest for me. "How was work, Elena?" A standard question at family dinners, asked with that peculiar intonation that suggests the answer couldn't possibly be interesting. "Fine, thanks," is my standard reply, followed by a discreet transition to something more important: Vanessa's latest cardiac surgical innovation, or Noah's new round of funding. The reality of my professional life and my family's perception of it existed in parallel universes that never intersected. At the Thanksgiving table, I couldn't tell you how I'd spent the previous week tracking a trail of laundered money through 7 countries, while my brother and sister dominated the conversation with their latest accomplishments, and my parents nodded approvingly. Instead of fighting for recognition, I gradually distanced myself from family gatherings. My demanding work became a convenient excuse. "Sorry, Mom, I can't make it to Mother's Day. I have an emergency." It wasn't even a lie. It was just that urgent business usually meant preventing funding for a terrorist cell, not paperwork as they assumed. Strange how professional ties sometimes go deeper than blood ties. Catherine and Joseph, my colleagues in the unit, understood my passion in a way my biological family never could. After a 36-hour operation, as we sat in an unnamed diner at 3 in the morning, celebrating success with coffee and donuts, a true camaraderie developed between us, the kind that only forms in people who have seen each other in their most stressful moments and stayed close anyway. "Here's to catching bad guys," Joseph proposed a toast, raising a paper cup. "And to the fact that no one will ever know we did it," Catherine added with a wry chuckle. We clinked cups, realizing the irony of our job, doing extraordinary things in complete anonymity, They knew about my family, about how I was perceived at home. They didn't think it was weird or sad, just another layer of secrecy in a life already full of secrets. One day, your father will turn on CNN and see the results of your work without even knowing you did it, Joseph once remarked. There's something poetic about that. He may have been right. But sometimes, in rare moments of vulnerability, I admitted to myself that I wished I could hear the same words of pride from my father that he so easily spoke to my brother and sister. Elena, you need to come to your father's birthday party. My mother's voice over the phone was adamant, allowing no objection. 65 years is an important date. The whole family will attend. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. And even though I hadn't seen the whole family together in almost 2 years, I knew I couldn't refuse. Some family commitments are sacred, even when they bring discomfort. Okay, Mom, I surrendered. I will. Fine. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. And please wear something decent. Another little prod, implying that without special instructions, I might appear inappropriately dressed. My mother, Diane Morgan, a former state senator, had always been extremely concerned about appearance. In her world, perception was everything. I know how to dress, Mom, I replied, trying to keep the irritation from seeping into my voice. Of course you do, dear, she said in a tone that suggested otherwise. Just wanted to remind you. Your brother is bringing a new girlfriend. She's an investment banker from Goldman Sachs. Of course she was. Noah always chose women who fit perfectly into the family's idea of success. They were like accessories matched to a suit, flawlessly complementing the image of a rising star in the tech world. In preparation for an evening of family torture, I made an appointment to meet Zachary, a local contact from the Connecticut office, at a small cafe near the restaurant. We hadn't seen each other in person in almost a year, and I needed to get him encrypted files on Blackwood Associates, a real estate company suspected of laundering money for international criminal organizations. Zachary arrived right on time, his unassuming appearance the perfect fit for our line of work. An ordinary middle-aged man with balding hair that no one would remember 5 minutes after meeting him. Hello, Elena. He sat down across from me, placing a plain leather briefcase between us. What are you doing in Connecticut? Family stuff, I replied. Dad's birthday. He nodded understandingly, not requiring further explanation. One of the advantages of working with other agents is that they respect personal boundaries. I have what you requested. He discreetly handed me an outwardly ordinary flash drive. Blackwood has stepped up in the last 3 weeks. It looks like they're cooking up something big. We spent the next 30 minutes discussing the details of the case, the movement of funds through shell companies, suspicious real estate purchases, connections to known criminal figures. To any observer, we looked like two co-workers discussing boring business matters. Oh, and one more thing, Zachary said as we were finishing up. Blackwood has accounts with the Greenwich Trust. Do you have connections there? I shook my head, and suddenly the irony struck me. Greenwich Trust was the bank that had served my family for generations. My father played golf with their CEO every Saturday. If only he had known that his daughter was investigating one of their biggest clients. This routine intelligence exchange underscored how disconnected my real professional life and my family's perception of my career were. In one world, I was a respected leader of an elite unit. In the other, a disappointing daughter who never realized her potential. Good luck tonight, Zachary said, standing up. Something in my facial expression must have given away my inner tension. Thanks, I replied. I think I'm going to need it. On the way to the restaurant, I checked my secure phone, looking up information on Blackwood. Numbers, patterns, connections. It all made perfect sense to me, folding into a pattern of suspicious activity. It was a puzzle I was born to solve, a challenge that ignited my mind in a way nothing else could. And yet, in an hour, I was to sit at a table where no one would see these abilities, where I would be judged by an entirely different standard, a standard I had never aspired to meet. As I prepared myself for the inevitable condescension, I didn't realize that my worlds were about to collide, that the walls I'd so carefully built between Agent Elena Morgan and daughter Elena Morgan were about to crumble. And yet the warning signs were right in front of me. Blackwood and his ties to the Greenwich Trust. Bellevue, the restaurant we used as a vantage point during Operation Stevens last year. The house of cards of my double life was built on sand, and the tidal wave was coming. If you've ever lived a double life, whether it's a hidden career, a secret hobby, or a part of yourself you hide from loved ones, you know how draining it is to have to constantly switch between versions of yourself. But what happens when those worlds finally collide? When the masks fall off and you have to reconcile all the parts of yourself in one space? Subscribe to my channel to find out how this story unfolded next. Give me likes if you've ever felt the pressure to conform to other people's expectations, and share in the comments. Have you ever had to hide an important part of your life from your family? How did you handle it? The Bellevue restaurant towered like a monument to Greenwich's wealth. The stone facade and ivy-covered walls hinted at old money and exclusivity. At the entrance, clerks in impeccable uniforms hurriedly opened car doors for arriving guests, who stepped out of luxury vehicles that cost more than the average American's annual salary. As I watched this ritual of wealth slowly emerge from my quite decent but decidedly unimpressive sedan, I felt for a moment like an imposter in this world of ostentatious affluence. Have you ever noticed how certain habits from your professional life creep into your personal life? I arrived 15 minutes early, a professional habit that allows me to assess my surroundings and gather my thoughts before family dynamics start to pick up. In my line of work, arriving early can be the difference between a successful operation and failure. In family dinners, it's simply a way to mentally prepare for the challenge ahead. The maitre d', an impeccably dressed man with perfect posture, escorted me to my father's table, typically conspicuous, in the center of the room, overlooking the entire restaurant. My father always chose seats that emphasized his status: the table with the best view, the board chair with the most influence, the house with the most impressive facade. For Gerald Morgan, life was always a performance, and he always demanded a front row seat. While I waited, my professional training took over. I began observing the restaurant with the same analytical thinking I applied during operations, categorizing other diners' behavior, their relationships, potential points of interest. The couple in the corner were clearly celebrating an anniversary. Strained smiles, formal gestures, the classic picture of a long marriage in which romance has long since given way to habit. A group of men at the bar, a business meeting, judging by their body language and the way one of them discreetly dominated the conversation. A family with a teenager at the far end of the room. The parents were trying to engage the child in conversation, but the child was immersed in his phone, physically present but mentally somewhere far away. I wonder if my family looked the same from the outside. The perfect picture of success and togetherness, hiding the complex undercurrents of frustration and misunderstanding. I noticed their arrival before they even entered the hall. The slight change in atmosphere, the way the staff straightened up slightly in preparation for their important guests. The Morgan family had that effect wherever they went. My mother, Diana, appeared first, impeccable in a cream suit from a designer I couldn't afford. Behind her, my father. His gray hair and perfectly fitting suit radiated authority and confidence. Then Vanessa and her husband Michael, both looking like they were from the cover of a successful professional lifestyle magazine. And finally, Noah and his new girlfriend, a petite blonde in a black dress that screamed expensive without a single visible logo. Their interaction with me followed a predictable pattern rehearsed over the years. Mother approached first, marking air kisses somewhere around my cheeks, carefully avoiding any real contact that might ruin her makeup. "Elena, you look professional," she remarked, casting me an appraising glance. It was neither a compliment nor an insult, just a statement of fact that I met the minimum standard of appearance for the event. In my mother's dictionary, professional meant presentable enough not to embarrass us, but without much style or personality. My father followed with a formal greeting, as if I had come from another continent rather than spent only a few hours on the road. "Elena, glad you could join us," he said in a tone he used for business associates he wasn't particularly close to. Vanessa walked over then, her eyes instantly appreciating my outfit. "Isn't that the same suit you wore to Caroline's wedding?" she asked with a slight smile that didn't hide the implication. Only a person with a limited closet wears the same thing to different events. Well, she was right. It was the same suit. It's just that most of my clothes were chosen for functionality, not to make an impression. It's hard to worry about closet diversity when you spend your days tracking down financial criminals and thwarting terrorist threats. Noah offered a more sincere greeting, his hug being the only real physical contact of the evening. "It's good to see you, sis," he said, and for a moment I felt a glimmer of real connection. But that moment quickly dissolved as we sat down at the table, and the conversation predictably turned to family accomplishments. My career was mentioned only in passing, as an addendum. "Elena still works for the government, in some administrative department," my mother explained to Noah's new girlfriend, her tone suggesting that this was a temporary situation that I would no doubt outgrow soon. I was used to this narrative by now, and usually just let it exist. But today, perhaps because of the conversation with Zachary, or the growing sense of disconnect between my two lives, I felt a prick of irritation. "Actually, I work in a specialized unit," I said, surprising even myself with this small act of resistance. "Specialized in what, dear?" Mother asked, her look making it clear that any specialization in government work was hardly worthy of consideration. Before I could come up with a sufficiently evasive answer, my secure phone vibrated with a definite rhythm that I instantly recognized as a top priority signal. I checked the screen under my desk and saw a coded message from my team. Blackwood was making unexpected financial transactions through the Greenwich Trust, and we needed to act fast. "Sorry, I need to respond to that," I said, standing up. "It's a work issue. I'll be back in a minute." I retreated to a quiet corner of the restaurant and quickly gave operational instructions to my team, reallocating resources to monitor transactions, setting up additional surveillance of the Blackwood offices, preparing warrants in case urgent action was needed. It took less than 5 minutes, but when I returned to my desk, the atmosphere had distinctly changed. "Everything okay?" Vanessa asked, in a tone that suggested that nothing in my work could be really urgent or important. "Yeah, just had to take care of an issue," I replied, taking my seat. "Must be a very important meeting about how to properly fill out forms," Michael, Vanessa's husband, joked, causing condescending smiles around the table. "Actually, it was—" I paused, realizing the pointlessness of the explanation. "Whatever." The tension increased when they brought menus without prices for all the women at the table. A common practice in restaurants like this, but Vanessa was quick to point out, "Elena, if you're worried about prices, we can help with dinner. I know it's hard to afford places like this on a government salary." The irony of the situation was almost comical. My base salary, not counting bonuses for successful surgeries, was comparable to Vanessa's husband. But the image of the poor relative was too deeply ingrained in the family mythology for facts to shake it. "I'm fine, thanks," I replied, trying to keep my voice sounding neutral. My phone beeped again, and I quickly checked it without getting up this time. Noah, noticing the movement, leaned closer. "Geez, Elena, do you still have that outdated model? I can help you upgrade it to something more modern," he offered condescendingly. If only he knew that my outdated phone contained security systems that weren't in his shiny new iPhone. That it was specially modified to protect it from eavesdropping and hacking, with encryption capabilities that would have made his tech directors green with envy. "It fulfills its function," I replied simply. As dinner progressed, the criticism of my supposed career failure became more and more direct. My father began his usual speech about untapped potential. My mother sighed about how it's never too late for a career change. Vanessa mentioned an acquaintance at a law firm that was always looking for smart assistants, as if that was a promotion over my current job. I was getting ready for another round of carefully veiled disappointment when Patricia, the restaurant manager, approached our table, accompanied by a young trainee waiter. I recognized her instantly. We'd worked with her during Operation Stevens last year, when my team had used the restaurant as a surveillance point, but there was no way I expected her to recognize me. "Good evening, Morgan family," she greeted with a professional smile. "I hope you're enjoying your evening. This is Jared. He'll be helping serve your table tonight." Jared, a young man in his early 20s, smiled at everyone at the table with the enthusiasm typical of newcomers. Then his gaze stopped on me, and I saw a moment of recognition in his eyes. "Agent Morgan!" he exclaimed with sudden enthusiasm. "It's such an honor to see you again. I'll never forget the way you ran the operation during the Stevens investigation. All the things you did from our back room. It was amazing." Time seemed to stop. There was a deafening silence around the table as my family tried to comprehend this unexpected revelation. I saw facial expressions change from confusion to disbelief, from disbelief to shock. "Agent," my father interjected, his voice sounding like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Patricia, a professional with years of experience, instantly realized her mistake. She threw a warning glance at Jared, but it was too late. The cat was out of the bag, and in the most dramatic fashion. "I apologize for the inconvenience," she said quickly, trying to smooth things over. "Jared, why don't you get the Morgan family some more bread?" But Jared, still not realizing the awkwardness of the moment, continued. "Seriously, the way you coordinated the whole operation, I've never seen anything like it. My sister is studying criminal law, and I told her all about it. You are a true inspiration." At that moment, I felt all eyes at the table turn to me. Mother looked as if someone had just informed her that her favorite designer was using knockoffs. Father froze with his glass of wine halfway to his mouth. Vanessa and Michael exchanged looks that clearly said, "What the hell is going on?" Noah looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of confusion and respect. "Jared," Patricia said firmly, "bread, now." Finally realizing the situation, the young man blushed and quickly withdrew. Patricia threw me an apologetic look. "Have a nice evening," she said, and elegantly retreated, leaving me to face my shocked family. "Elena," my mother began in the tone she used when she discovered I was reading crime reports at the age of 12. "What was that just about?" I opened my mouth to answer, but I wasn't sure where to start. How to explain 5 years of living a double life? How to talk about the operations, the lives saved, the attacks averted, the world so different from their reality that it might as well exist in a parallel universe. But before I could utter a word, my phone vibrated again, this time with a particular rhythm I knew by heart. The director in person. And that could only mean one thing. Blackwood was making his move. Sometimes the most carefully constructed facades crumble, not gradually, but in one catastrophic moment. Standing on the threshold of that moment, I realized that my carefully constructed double life was over. Now I had to figure out what would be left after the dust settled. If you've ever had to hide an important part of your life from loved ones, you understand how the moment when all the masks come off can feel. It's both relieving and terrifying at the same time. The end of one story and the beginning of a whole new one. There are moments when all your worlds collide and it's like time slows down. My family's faces froze in expressions of shock and disbelief, and the words "Agent Morgan" still hung in the air like shards of broken glass. I could almost physically feel the wall between my lives crumbling, brick by brick. Before I could even begin my explanation, my secure phone vibrated with a special rhythm. 3 short, 2 long. It was a cipher I knew by heart. Principal Charlotte personally. These calls came only at moments of highest priority, when minutes counted. Have you ever felt your priorities instantly rearranged? How personal issues that seemed huge a second ago suddenly recede before something more important? That's exactly what I experienced when I looked at my phone. "I need to take this," I said, pushing back my chair. "So, Elena," my father said my name with real attention for the first time tonight. "What's going on? What did that young man mean by calling you an agent? You could hear the demand in his voice, the same tone he used in the boardroom, expecting an immediate and full explanation. A tone that everyone around him obeyed. Everyone but me. Not today. The phone continued to vibrate. Blackwood was making his move. I didn't have time for a long explanation or to soften the blow to their egos. I'm a federal agent, not an administrative assistant, I said simply, gathering my things. The details of my job are classified, and that's all I can say at this point. I pulled a few $100 bills out of my wallet and placed them on the table, more than enough to cover my portion of the bill, including a generous tip. It was a small but meaningful gesture, a rebuttal to their perception of my financial situation. Elna, you can't just, my mother began, but I was already moving toward the exit. For the first time in my adult life, I walked with my head held high, not bending under the weight of their disappointment. A strange sense of freedom swept over me as I stepped out of the restaurant into the cool evening air. But I couldn't savor this moment for long. As soon as the doors closed behind me, I mentally switched into operational mode. On the way to my car, I answered the principal's cell phone. "Morgan," I said, my voice automatically taking on a professional clarity. "Blackwood is making his move," Principal Charlotte reported without preamble. "We've received information that he plans to leave the country within the hour. A private jet is waiting at Westchester Airport. We need to act immediately." "I'll be in the office in 15 minutes," I replied, already calculating a route with minimal traffic. "The team is assembling. Zachary is already there." The director paused. "Elena, we're tracking the movement of nearly $30 million through the Greenwich Trust. If Blackwood slips away, that money is gone forever." "He won't slip away," I assured her, starting the car. It's amazing how quickly roles can change. 15 minutes ago, I'd been the invisible daughter, patiently tolerating condescending remarks. Now I was Agent Morgan again, a leading expert on financial crimes with international implications. The local field office buzzed with focused energy when I arrived. The normally unremarkable building on the outskirts of Greenwich now resembled a military headquarters. Agents moved with purpose, computer screens showed surveillance feeds, and the atmosphere crackled with the tension of an operation in progress. Zachary met me at the entrance, holding out a clipboard with the latest data. "Blackwood is consolidating funds through a chain of accounts. Endpoint is the Cayman Islands," he informed me as we walked briskly to the command center. "The private jet is scheduled for 23:30. We have information that he plans to leave his estate in 1 hour." In the command center, a dozen agents were working on various aspects of the operation. Analysts were monitoring financial transactions in real time. The tactical team was preparing equipment. Coordinators were liaising with local law enforcement to set up roadblocks. I walked in, and all eyes turned to me. Here, unlike at a family dinner, my presence carried weight. Here I was seen, really seen. "Okay, let's get started," I said as I approached the tactical map. "Update on Blackwood's activity in the last hour?" For the next 60 minutes, I led with honed precision, coordinating surveillance teams, tactical units, roadblocks, and financial monitoring. It was a complex choreography where every move had to be perfectly synchronized to prevent Blackwood's escape and secure the evidence. "New activity," the analyst reported. "Blackwood is transferring another $5 million through Shellcorp in Cyprus." "Block it," I ordered, "and send a request to the Cypriot authorities to freeze all related accounts." "Surveillance reports movement in the estate," another agent reported. "Looks like they're getting the car ready." "Is the tactical team in position?" I asked. "Yes, they've surrounded the perimeter. All exit points are under control." I looked at my watch. 21:45. Blackwood was starting his movement earlier than we'd anticipated. A good sign, he was nervous, and nervous criminals make mistakes. "Catherine, status on the warrant?" "Received 5 minutes ago. We have a green light to arrest and seize all documents." I nodded, feeling the familiar adrenaline rush. This was the moment when months of investigation converged at one point. The moment when all the preparation, all the sleepless nights, all the missed family reunions finally made sense. Tell the tactical team, when the subject exits, immediate interception. Prioritize safe apprehension and preservation of evidence. Blackwood may be armed, but unlikely to offer active resistance. The next minutes stretched like hours. We monitored movement in the estate through the security cameras. Blackwood was moving between rooms, giving final instructions to his assistant, checking a small briefcase, presumably containing documents or valuables. Movement, the surveillance agent reported. Subject is leaving the main building through the rear entrance, heading toward the parking garage. All teams on standby, I commanded. He's going to try to use the service road to make an inconspicuous exit. We froze, watching events unfold on the screens. The black Range Rover pulled out of the garage and headed toward the back of the estate. It was there, on the service road, that Blackwood considered his secret escape route, that our agents were waiting for him. The operation reached its climax just after 22 o'clock. The Range Rover turned onto a narrow road, illuminated only by the car's headlights, and was immediately surrounded by 3 unremarkable sedans. A professional interception. No drama, no shootouts like in the movies, just methodical execution of the plan. Subject apprehended, the tactical team leader reported over the radio. No resistance has been offered. We have a briefcase and 3 mobile devices. A wave of relief swept through the command center. Months of work had been crowned with success. Blackwood arrested, $30 million in illegally obtained funds frozen, money laundering routes cut off. It meant the possibility of recovery for dozens of victims of his schemes, people who had lost their homes, their savings, their pensions. Great work, team, I said, allowing myself a small smile. Let's start the documentation process. Catherine, coordinate with the finance department to freeze the remaining accounts. Joseph, secure the digital evidence. Zachary, we need a full report on the movement of funds for the last 24 hours. The next 3 hours were spent in organizational work, making sure the arrest was properly proceduralized, preserving the chain of evidence, coordinating with other agencies. Not the most glamorous part of the job, but critical to ensuring the case would stand up in court. Director Charlotte called for the report, and I heard a rare note of approval in her usually reserved voice. Excellent work, Morgan. The ministry is very interested in this case. Expect an official thank you. I thanked her, but my thoughts were already starting to return to more personal issues. To my family sitting in the restaurant, trying to make sense of the revelation about my real career. To the inevitable conversation that awaited me. When I returned to my hotel room at 1 a.m., I felt the adrenaline of the operation give way to exhaustion. 5 hours of intense concentration and decision-making had taken its toll. I took off my jacket, took off my shoes, and finally allowed myself to sit on the edge of the bed. Only then did I pull out my personal cell phone, which I'd been ignoring since leaving the restaurant. The screen literally exploded with notifications. 6 missed calls from my father, 4 from my mother, 3 from Vanessa, 2 from Noah, and a dozen text messages ranging from embarrassed to demanding to, surprisingly, respectful. I started going through the messages, not knowing what to expect. From my mom. Elna, we deserve an explanation. Please call back immediately. From Vanessa. What kind of show did you put on? Dad's upset. Call me. Then, seriously, Elena, what's going on? Are you really some kind of secret agent, or is this just a misunderstanding? And finally, talk to me, please. I'm worried. Her father's messages were short and demanding. Call me. We need to talk. Elena, this is unacceptable. But it was the message from Noah that made me stop. Hey sis, I think I completely misjudged you for years. That was the coolest leaving I've ever seen. Respect. Let's talk when you can. I reread his message twice, not quite believing my eyes. Out of my entire family, Noah was the last person I expected to understand. He was always so focused on the external markers of success, prestige, money, name recognition. Yet it was he who was the first to express respect for my real career. The irony didn't escape me. For years I lived a double life, certain that my family could never appreciate or understand my choices. I had created a separation between my worlds, believing them to be incompatible. But perhaps I had underestimated my family as much as they had underestimated me. I put the phone away, too tired to answer it now. The morning, as they say, is wiser. Tomorrow I would have to bridge my divided worlds, explain who I really was, and perhaps truly get to know my family for the first time. As I fell asleep, I reflected on the strange paradox that it took the public disclosure of my secret for me to finally feel visible. Sometimes we need to lose control to gain freedom, and sometimes the most unexpected twists and turns take us exactly where we need to be. Have you ever wondered how much energy we spend trying to conform to other people's expectations instead of just being ourselves? And what can happen when we finally find the courage to show the world who we really are? You know that special morning after a storm, when the air feels amazingly clear, like all the toxins have been washed away and the world is starting anew? That's exactly how I felt waking up after my Blackwood surgery. Physically, I was exhausted. Operational nights are never easy. But internally, for the first time in years, I felt strangely light. No longer did I need to maintain a facade or belittle my accomplishments. Whatever happened next with my family would be based on truth, not convenient lies. Lying in my hotel room, I went over my options for my next step. My mother had already sent a text message suggesting a family council at the country club, where we would be served by staff who had known the Morgans for generations. This was her territory, a place where social status was currency, and outward appearances of success were carefully cultivated and displayed. But I wasn't going to play by those rules anymore. "Meet me at the Sunnyside Diner in an hour," I texted all the family members. "We need to talk." The location mattered. Sunnyside was a regular diner a couple blocks from my hotel, an unassuming place with shabby booths, endless coffee, and the best pancakes in town. A regular place for regular people. Neutral territory instead of the environment that had reinforced their perceptions of me for years. As I awaited their arrival, I watched an elderly couple in the corner, quietly sharing a newspaper, a waitress joking with regular customers, a family with young children making havoc with maple syrup. Everyday life, devoid of pretension. My world, not theirs. I saw them before they even entered, a group of impeccably dressed people, looking a little lost on the sidewalk in front of a modest diner. My mother in a cashmere sweater and designer jeans that could cover a week's rent for an apartment. My father in what he considered casual wear, ironed slacks, and a polo shirt that I was sure cost a triple-digit sum. Vanessa looked like she'd stepped out of the pages of a J.Crew catalog, and Noah, though wearing regular jeans and a t-shirt, managed to wear even that with the look of someone who was used to expensive things. They looked completely out of place entering the diner. Vanessa was clearly fighting the urge to reach for the hand sanitizer. Her mother was cautiously glancing around the shabby booths with an expression as if she were evaluating a disadvantaged neighborhood for a charity project. Father just looked annoyed. His face took on that expression that usually appeared when something didn't meet his standards. "Helena," Mother began with a strained smile as they reached my cubicle. "Unusual choice of place." "The pancakes here are excellent," I replied, gesturing for them to sit down. "And we need to talk without any unnecessary distractions." They settled in across from me, my mother and father next to me, Vanessa and Noah on the edges. 5 people sharing the same last name, but at this moment seemed almost strangers. As we ordered our coffees, I noticed my mother eyeing her cup warily. We fell into an awkward silence. Usually in situations like this, I relented, letting them control the conversation. But not today. "I assume you have questions," I began. surprised at the calmness in my voice. Questions? Dad snorted. Elena, you made a scene at my birthday party, called yourself a federal agent, and disappeared without explanation. We have more than just questions. 5 years ago, I would have cringed at his tone. Today, I just took a sip of coffee and met his gaze. I can't discuss the specifics of what I do. But yes, I am indeed a federal investigative specialist. I run a task force that deals with financial crimes with national security implications. It's a position I've held for years, while you all thought my career was insignificant. Their faces reflected varying degrees of shock and reassessment. My mother looked like she was trying to digest new information that contradicted everything she thought she knew. Vanessa looked at me with open disbelief, as if expecting me to admit to a prank. Noah, surprisingly, looked almost impressed. Why didn't you ever tell us? Vanessa asked. All these years, every holiday, every family dinner. Partly for security reasons, I replied. Our protocols recommend that we keep the details of our work private. I paused, realizing I needed to be completely honest right now. But the truth is, it went on because it became clear that you all had formed a certain view of my career choice, and frankly, I was tired of defending myself. It was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe about my job. Dad opened his mouth to object, but I continued. Every time we got together, you all shared your accomplishments. Vanessa's new surgery, Noah's new round of funding, Mom's charity project. And when it came to me, you all physically shut down, as if my life was a boring commercial block in the middle of an exciting show. That's not fair, Helena, the mother began, but her voice sounded unsure. Really? I asked. At the last Thanksgiving, you talked about the charity gala for 15 minutes. Then Dad discussed his new board of directors for another 20. Vanessa talked about her new surgical technique, and Noah talked about his interview for Tech Insider. When I started to talk about the case I was working on, in the most general terms, of course, you interrupted me after 30 seconds to ask if anyone had passed the cranberry sauce. Silence ensued. I could see them mentally going over years of interactions, perhaps seeing for the first time a pattern that was painfully obvious to me. Jesus! Noah finally uttered. We were real assholes, weren't we? This unexpected moment of sincerity diffused the tension. Vanessa made a sound that was half chuckle, half sigh. Even her father looked mollified. It's not about blaming anyone, I said. It's just that you've all always had a very specific idea of success. Prestigious degrees, certain careers, certain lifestyles, and my choices have never fit into that picture. The conversation gradually took on a new quality. For the first time in years, they began to ask questions with genuine interest rather than condescension. My mother wanted to know if my job was dangerous, sometimes. Vanessa asked about my team, about the structure of the investigations. Noah was intrigued by the technological aspects. And then my father said something I never expected to hear. I owe you an apology, Elena. I clearly underestimated both you and your career. Those words, spoken with uncharacteristic modesty, contained more than a simple admission of error. It was an admission that his measure of success was limited, that his daughter had built something of value, even if it didn't meet his expectations. We talked for almost 2 hours until the coffee was cold and the plates were empty. It wasn't a magical moment of instant healing. Too many years of miscommunication can't be erased with one conversation. But it was the first real conversation we'd had in a long time. The first step towards something more genuine. In the months that followed that morning, my relationship with my family slowly evolved. The changes were subtle, but significant. My father began to treat me as a professional equal, sometimes even asking my opinion on business situations, which had been unthinkable before. Mother's concern now came from genuine worry rather than frustration. She even sent me a set of high-quality waterproof boots with a note. I don't know exactly what you do, but I hope these will be useful. Vanessa made a careful new connection. Over lunch, a few weeks after the revelation, as we began to call it, she confessed, I was making assumptions based on a narrow definition of success. I think I've always been a little jealous of your independence, the fact that you've chosen your own path. This admission from my perfect older sister was both shocking and healing to me. Most surprising, however, was the transformation in my relationship with Noah. My brother, who had always been the epitome of what our family strived for, actually came to me for help when his company faced security threats. Seeing the respect in his eyes when I helped him set up protocols that protected his user data from potential hacking was oddly gratifying. Who would have thought my big sister was actually some kind of secret super agent? He joked, but there was genuine admiration behind the joke. Our journey to a new understanding of each other culminated 6 months after Operation Blackwood. I was in the office going over reports on a new case when I received an unexpected call from my father. "Elena," he began with an uncertainty unusual for him, "your mother happened to mention that you have some sort of awards ceremony on Friday. Something to do with the Blackwood case?" I was surprised. It was one of those rare public recognition ceremonies that sometimes happen in our line of work. Recognition for recovering tens of millions of dollars for fraud victims and preventing those funds from being used to finance illegal activity. "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "No big deal, just a formality." A pause followed. "We'd like to attend," he said, "if that's okay with you." That simple request contained whole layers of meaning. My father, who had spent years pushing me toward his definition of success, was now asking permission to celebrate my success. Not criticizing, not belittling, but simply recognizing its value. "I would love that," I replied, surprised at how sincere it sounded. On the day of the ceremony, I saw them sitting in the second row, my entire family, dressed in understated business suits, a step back from their usual ostentatious elegance, listening intently as the principal described our accomplishments. They looked a little out of place in a room full of federal agents and officials, but they were there. For me. Later, at a modest reception, I watched my father talk to Principal Charlotte and my mother swap stories with Catherine. Vanessa was asking Joseph about the medical aspects of our field operations, and Noah and Zachary, to my surprise, were passionately discussing encryption technology. My two worlds were finally merging, not perfectly, not without friction, but with a new understanding and respect. Standing there, I realized that true self-worth comes not from external validation, but from internal alignment with my own values and goals. For years, I felt inadequate because I didn't fit my family's definition of success. But in fact, by doing work that mattered to me, I built a life of deep fulfillment and purpose. And perhaps the most important lesson: sometimes the people who underestimate you give you the greatest gift of all, the freedom to exceed their expectations on your own terms. By living in the shadow of their disappointment, I created a career that I could truly be proud of. A career that reflected my values, not their ambitions. Our family relationship was still a work in progress. There were moments when old habits would manifest themselves, when their definition of success would once again become the yardstick against which they unknowingly judged me. But now there was a new foundation of honesty and respect between us. "Elena!" my father called out to me, distracting me from my thoughts. "The principal told me about your work on the Stevens case last year. You never mentioned that you saved the retirement accounts of over 150 families." There was none of the usual appraisal in his voice, just genuine curiosity and perhaps pride. "It was a team effort," I replied, but without downplaying my role as I would have done before. "We tracked the case for almost a year before we finally gathered all the evidence." He nodded, listening intently, really listening, perhaps for the first time in years. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the most important operations we run aren't about criminals or financial schemes. Sometimes they have to do with breaking down the walls we've built ourselves and revealing our true selves to those who should know us best. Do you ever feel like you have to hide parts of yourself to meet other people's expectations? What if instead we allowed ourselves to be fully visible, with all of our unexpected talents and unorthodox choices? Perhaps, as I've discovered, this is the only path to true connection and acceptance, not only by others, but more importantly, by ourselves.